They called him the Ghost of Moscow. For 23 years, Dmitri Volkov had been the KGB's most lethal weapon. A man who could infiltrate any organization, eliminate any target, and vanish without a trace. His file was sealed at the highest levels of Soviet intelligence. Even his handlers feared him. Dmitri had survived 67 missions. 67 times he had walked into the jaws of death and emerged victorious. Berlin, Prague, London, Kabul. His hands were stained with the blood of defectors, double agents, and enemies of the state. But Dmitri never questioned his orders. He was forged in the brutal training camps of the KGB, where weakness meant death and loyalty meant everything. He had no family, no friends, no life outside the shadows. The Soviet Union was his mother. The KGB was his father. And obedience was his religion. In 1989, as the Berlin Wall crumbled and the Soviet Empire began to collapse, Dmitri received his final assignment. A traitor had stolen classified documents detailing every KGB operative in Western Europe. The traitor's name was Viktor Petrov, a high-ranking officer who had sold out his country for American dollars. The orders were clear: find Viktor. Retrieve the documents. Eliminate him. Dmitri tracked Viktor to Vienna. It took him 3 weeks of surveillance, infiltration, and careful planning. He watched Viktor's every move, studied his patterns, identified his weaknesses. And then, on a cold November night, Dmitri struck. He cornered Viktor in a safe house on the outskirts of the city. But as Dmitri pressed his pistol against Viktor's temple, the traitor smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent ice through Dmitri's veins. "You think you're here for the documents?" Viktor laughed bitterly. "You fool. You've always been a fool. Where are they?" Dmitri demanded. Viktor reached into his jacket slowly and pulled out a thick envelope. But instead of classified files, he handed Dmitri a single photograph. Dmitri's hands trembled as he looked at the image. It showed a woman, beautiful, dark-haired, smiling, holding a young girl, perhaps 5 years old. The girl had Dmitri's eyes. "Her name is Anastasia," Viktor whispered. "Your daughter." "Impossible," Dmitri breathed. "I have no family." "That's what they told you." Viktor's voice was thick with contempt. 24 years ago, you were paired with Agent Katerina Volashina for a deep cover operation in Paris. You fell in love. She became pregnant. And when the KGB found out, they terminated the operation. They told you she died in the field. But she didn't die, Dmitri. They sent her to a labor camp in Siberia. She gave birth there. Your daughter has been raised in that frozen hell her entire life. The room spun around Dmitri. Every certainty he had ever known shattered like glass. "Why?" he managed to ask. "Because you were too valuable to lose," Viktor said. "They needed you emotionally empty. A man with nothing to lose is a man who will do anything. So they took everything from you, your love, your child, your humanity. And you thanked them for it. You became their perfect killer." Dmitri's gun hand wavered. "The documents I stole? They prove it all," Viktor continued. "Names, dates, locations. Katerina is still alive, barely. Camp 19, in the Kolyma region. She's been there for 23 years, Dmitri. 23 years of hell because she loved you. And your daughter? She's been raised to believe her father abandoned her. That you're a monster who cares for nothing but the state. Why are you telling me this?" Dmitri's voice cracked. "Because I want you to know the truth before you kill me," Viktor said simply. "I'm a traitor, yes. But I'm not a monster. These documents will destroy the KGB's operations in the West. Thousands of innocents will be saved. But more than that, they'll expose what they did to you. To your family. To hundreds of others like you. The KGB doesn't serve the people, Dmitri. It serves itself. And it feeds on the souls of men like us. Dmitri stood frozen, the gun trembling in his hand. So do it, Victor said, closing his eyes. Pull the trigger. Complete your mission. Go back to Moscow and report your success. Continue being their slave. Or. He opened his eyes, and they blazed with fierce intensity. Or use those documents. Burn it all down. Save your family. Become a man again instead of a weapon.
Dmitri didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he lowered his gun and read every page of Victor's documents. Hours passed as the horrible truth unfolded before him. Katerina hadn't just been sent to a labor camp. She'd been tortured, interrogated, psychologically broken. The KGB wanted to ensure she could never reveal what she knew about Dmitri's operations. And Anastasia. His daughter had been raised in conditions that made ordinary poverty look like luxury. Starvation, freezing temperatures, brutal guards, all while the KGB watched, documenting how environmental hardship shaped a child's development. She was an experiment, a case study in suffering. "They're going to kill her," Victor said quietly. "She turns 18 next month. The camp commandant has orders to eliminate her. She's become too much of a liability, old enough to escape, old enough to talk. They've kept detailed records of her entire life. When she's gone, all evidence disappears." Something inside Dmitri broke. Not suddenly, like a dam bursting, but slowly, like ice melting under a relentless sun. 23 years of suppressed emotion, of denied humanity, came flooding back. "Help me save them," Dmitri whispered. Victor smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that." The two men, former enemies, formed an alliance born of desperation and fury. Victor had connections with Western intelligence agencies eager to help embarrass the crumbling Soviet regime. But more importantly, he had detailed maps of Camp 19, guard rotations, and communication protocols. The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. They would travel to Siberia under false identities, infiltrate the camp during a scheduled supply delivery, extract Katerina and Anastasia, and escape across the border into China. They'd have perhaps 6 hours before the alarm was raised, and then every KGB asset in the Far East would be hunting them. But Dmitri had spent 2 decades perfecting the art of impossible missions. This time, however, the stakes were different. This time, he wasn't fighting for the state. He was fighting for his soul. The journey to Siberia took 3 weeks. They traveled through underground networks, smuggler routes, and forgotten roads. As they moved east, Victor told Dmitri stories of the man he used to be, before the KGB twisted him into something else. "I remember your first mission," Victor said one night as they huddled in a freezing rail car. "Budapest, 1966. You were 19 years old. They sent you to eliminate a defector who was about to testify against the Soviet regime. Do you remember what you did afterward?" Dmitri nodded slowly. "I vomited for 3 hours. Couldn't eat for days." "And do you remember what happened a year later? In Prague?" "I felt nothing," Dmitri whispered. "Exactly." Victor's eyes were hard. "That's how they destroy you. Mission by mission, kill by kill, they strip away your humanity until all that's left is a machine that follows orders. I should know. I was like you once. But then I watched them torture a 14-year-old girl because her father was a dissident. I heard her screams. And I realized, we're not heroes. We're monsters serving other monsters." When they finally reached the Kolyma region, Dmitri barely recognized the landscape. It was a frozen wasteland, a place where temperatures dropped to 50 below zero and hope went to die. Camp 19 was hidden in a valley surrounded by mountains, a perfect prison, impossible to escape from without help. They spent 4 days observing the camp, timing the guard changes, identifying weaknesses. Dmitri used every skill he'd learned, every technique he'd mastered. But now, instead of hunting, he was rescuing. Instead of taking life, he was saving it. The night of the extraction was moonless and bitterly cold. They approached the camp hidden in a supply truck, buried under crates of food and fuel. The guards were lazy, bored, unprepared for any real threat. Why would they be? No one had ever tried to break into a Siberian labor camp. Dmitri moved through the darkness like the ghost they'd named him. He disabled security systems, neutralized guards with silent efficiency, and made his way to the women's barracks. His heart pounded not with fear, but with something he hadn't felt in over 2 decades, hope. He found Katerina in a room with 30 other prisoners. She was thin, her face prematurely aged by hardship, her hair streaked with grey. But when she looked up and saw him, her eyes, those same beautiful eyes he remembered from Paris, widened with recognition and disbelief. "Dmitri," she whispered, as if speaking to a ghost. "We don't have time," he said urgently. "Where's Anastasia?" Tears streamed down Katerina's face. "She's in solitary. They caught her trying to escape last week. Dmitri, they're going to execute her tomorrow morning. The orders came 3 days ago." The ice in Dmitri's veins turned to fire. He fought his way to the solitary confinement block, taking down guards with brutal efficiency. Each blow, each takedown was driven by 23 years of rage finally unleashed. These men had tortured his family. They would pay. He found Anastasia in a cell barely large enough to stand in. She was huddled in the corner, shivering, covered in bruises from beatings. When she saw him, she flinched, conditioned to expect only violence from men in uniform. "I'm your father," Dmitri said, his voice breaking. "I've come to take you home." Anastasia stared at him with eyes that held no trust, no hope, only the hollow emptiness of someone who had suffered too much. "I don't have a father," she said flatly. "He abandoned us. That's what they told you. But it's a lie." Dmitri knelt before her. "Everything they told you was a lie. Your mother and I loved each other. We wanted you. They took you from us. But I'm here now, and I swear on my life, I will get you out of this hell." Something flickered in Anastasia's eyes, a desperate, fragile thing that might have been hope. The escape became a massacre. As Dmitri, Victor, Katerina, and Anastasia fled through the camp, alarms began to wail. Spotlights swept across the compound. Guards poured out of their barracks, weapons ready. The commandant had been tipped off. Someone in Victor's network had betrayed them. But Dmitri was no longer the obedient soldier who followed orders. He was a father protecting his family, and there was nothing more dangerous in the world than that. He fought with a ferocity that shocked even Victor. Every guard who stood between him and his family's freedom fell. Every obstacle was overcome through sheer force of will. Katerina, despite her weakened state, fought beside him, years of rage given violent release. Anastasia watched in stunned silence as her parents became avenging angels. They made it to the perimeter fence just as reinforcements arrived. Bullets tore through the night air. Victor took a round to the shoulder, but kept moving. Dmitri laid down covering fire while Katerina and Anastasia scrambled through a gap in the fence. "Go!" Victor shouted. "I'll hold them off. You'll die." Dmitri shouted back. "I've been dead for years." Victor laughed bitterly. At least this way, it means something. Get your family to safety. Make sure those documents reach the world. Burn it all down, Dmitri. Burn it all down. Dmitri hesitated for only a moment. Then he grabbed his family and ran into the darkness. Behind them, Victor's gun sang its last song, a defiant roar against tyranny and oppression. He took down a dozen guards before they finally overwhelmed him. His last thoughts were of freedom. The journey across the border took 5 days of grueling travel through mountain passes and frozen tundra. They nearly froze. They nearly starved. But Dmitri refused to let his family suffer any more. He carried Anastasia when she couldn't walk. He held Katerina when the memories became too much. He became the man he should have been 23 years ago. When they finally crossed into China, collapsing in the snow on the other side of the border, Anastasia spoke for the first time since leaving the camp. "Why?" she asked her father. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Dmitri looked at his daughter, this brave, broken young woman who had survived 18 years of hell, and told her the truth. "Because I didn't know," he said, tears freezing on his face. "They took my memories of your mother. They made me believe I had no family, no love, nothing but my duty to the state. They turned me into a weapon. But they made a mistake. They let me learn the truth. And the moment I knew you existed, nothing could stop me from finding you." Anastasia studied her father's face, scarred, weathered, haunted by 2 decades of violence. "Are you a good man?" she asked. "No," Dmitri said honestly. "I've done terrible things. I've killed innocents. I've served evil men. I can never wash the blood from my hands." He took her hand in his. "But I can try to be better. For you. For your mother. I can't change the past, but I can fight for a different future." Katerina placed her hand over both of theirs. "We all can." They eventually made their way to the West with the help of Victor's CIA contacts. The documents were published, creating an international scandal that accelerated the Soviet Union's collapse. Dozens of KGB operations were exposed. Hundreds of prisoners were released from camps like the one that had held Katerina and Anastasia. But for Dmitri, the real reckoning came in the quiet moments. Learning to be a father to a daughter who flinched at sudden movements. Helping Katerina heal from trauma that would never fully disappear. Waking up from nightmares where he saw the faces of everyone he'd killed. Living with the knowledge that he'd been a slave to a system that had stolen his humanity and used it as a weapon. 1 year after their escape, on Anastasia's 19th birthday, the 3 of them stood on a beach in California, watching the sunset. It was the first time Anastasia had ever seen the ocean. "Do you think Victor's watching?" she asked quietly. "I hope so," Dmitri said. "He gave us a gift. Not just our lives, but the chance to be human again. What will you do now?" Katerina asked her former partner, her hand finding his. Dmitri thought about the question. For 23 years, he'd been defined by his missions, his kills, his service to the state. Now, for the first time in his life, he was free to choose his own path. "I'll be a father," he said simply. "I'll be a husband. I'll try to do enough good to balance out the evil I've done. I'll wake up every morning and choose to be better than I was yesterday." He looked at his family, battered, scarred, but alive. "I'll live. Really live. That's the best revenge against those who tried to make me a machine." Anastasia smiled, the first genuine smile Dmitri had ever seen on her face. "Then we'll live together," she said, "as a family. But the KGB doesn't forgive. And it doesn't forget." 5 years later, Dmitri received a package at his home in Northern California. Inside was a single photograph, taken the week before, showing Dmitri, Katerina, and Anastasia at a restaurant. On the back was written a single sentence in Russian: "The ghost of Moscow cannot hide forever." Dmitri stared at the photograph, his blood running cold. Then he looked at his family, Katerina cooking dinner, Anastasia laughing on the phone with friends, both of them finally happy. He thought of Victor's sacrifice. He thought of the 67 missions he'd survived. He thought of the man he used to be and the man he'd become, and he made a decision. If they were coming for him, he wouldn't run. He wouldn't hide. He'd already lost 23 years to fear and obedience. He wouldn't lose another day. But he also wouldn't let them touch his family. That night, Dmitri sat his wife and daughter down and told them the truth. His past was coming for him. But he had a plan. They would disappear. New identities, new lives, protected by people who owed him favors. They would be safe. "What about you?" Anastasia asked, fear in her eyes. Dmitri smiled sadly. "I'm going to do what I should have done 23 years ago. I'm going to face them, not as their weapon, but as a free man." "That's suicide," Katerina whispered. "Maybe," Dmitri admitted. "Or maybe it's the first truly brave thing I've ever done. I've spent my entire life surviving. It's time to actually live, even if only for a moment." 3 weeks later, Dmitri turned himself in to Russian authorities. The trial was closed to the public, but the verdict was predetermined: death for treason, for betrayal, for abandoning the motherland. But Dmitri had one final card to play. Before his execution, he gave an interview to Western journalists that was broadcast around the world. He told his story, every detail, every horror, every truth about what the KGB had done to him and countless others. "I was the perfect soldier," he said into the cameras. "I followed every order. I killed without question. I sacrificed everything for the state. And what did it get me? They stole my family. They stole my humanity. They made me a monster. But even monsters can wake up. Even weapons can remember they were once men. And when they do, no power on earth can enslave them again. So kill me," he said, staring directly into the camera, knowing his handlers were watching. "Put a bullet in my head. Bury me in an unmarked grave. But know this: you've already lost, because my family is free, because the truth is known, because every person watching this now understands what tyranny really looks like. You can kill the man, but you cannot kill the idea. And the idea of freedom, true freedom, will outlive us all." Dmitri Volkov was executed by firing squad on a cold December morning in Moscow. But his death sparked something unexpected. His story inspired others, other agents, other prisoners, other victims of oppression, to speak out, to resist, to fight back. Within 5 years, the Soviet Union collapsed completely. The KGB was dissolved. Camp 19 was shut down and turned into a memorial for those who had suffered there. And in California, Katerina and Anastasia, now living under different names, but never forgetting who they were, watched the news of the Soviet Union's fall with tears streaming down their faces. "He won," Anastasia whispered. "Yes," Katerina said, holding her daughter close. "He won."